I have full confidence in Catherine and William. Their judgment is sound, their loyalty unquestionable.
For nearly 3 decades, Prince William had lived with the knowledge that thousands of people believed they understood his mother. They had studied her interviews, repeated her words, examined her choices, and turned her private pain into public history. But Charles Spencer was carrying something the world had never seen. A final private letter from Princess Diana, written for William alone. And when her brother finally placed it before him, the future king's composure began to crack. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles Spencer had protected the envelope for years as a promise. Diana had entrusted it to her brother with one condition. William should receive it only when duty, family, and the crown pulled him in different directions. The crown, meaning the monarchy and the responsibilities attached to royal life, had shaped the prince since childhood. Spencer had spent years wondering whether that moment had finally arrived. William stayed controlled until he saw the handwriting. Then he stopped. His mother's familiar script crossed the envelope and seemed to erase every year between them. He ran one thumb along the edge but did not open it. Spencer watched carefully, knowing this was no longer about history. It was about a son confronting a voice he thought he had lost forever. Spencer leaned forward and told William he had not come as an earl, public figure, or critic of royal life. An earl is a hereditary British nobleman, but that title meant nothing here. He had come as Diana's brother. William answered that he was not listening as Prince of Wales, the title held by the heir to the throne, but as her son. Then William noticed the second line on the envelope. Beneath his name, Diana had written a warning about what he must protect when loyalty to the institution collided with loyalty to those he loved. Spencer admitted she had discussed the purpose of the message with him, but never allowed him to read the final version. Whatever waited inside belonged to William alone. The envelope rested between them. William stared at it, then pulled out the chair and sat. He turned it over, pressed his fingers against the seal, and broke it, while Spencer remained silent. William began reading. Halfway through the first page, his face changed. He looked at his uncle and asked, "Who else knew she believed this?" The question hung heavily between them. Spencer did not answer immediately. That silence pulled William toward a moment years earlier, when Diana first began fearing what royal duty might demand from her eldest son. Before the letter could change anything, there was an older wound sitting between the two men. Charles Spencer had lost a sister. William had lost a mother. Their grief had followed different paths, shaped by different responsibilities, different silences, and different memories of Diana. Now those separate histories were colliding across a single table. Because the message she left behind was not simply about the past. It challenged the life William had built since losing her. William kept his eyes on the page, but the words were pulling him somewhere far beyond that room. As Diana's eldest son, he had spent most of his life carrying two identities at once. One belonged to the boy who remembered his mother laughing, comforting him, worrying about him. The other belonged to the future king, preparing for a constitutional role that would one day place him at the center of Britain's monarchy. A constitutional role means the public responsibilities tied to the crown rather than personal power. For William, those worlds had never sat comfortably together. Spencer understood a different version of the same pain. He remembered Diana before royal pressure changed so much around her, before every mistake became a headline, and every private feeling carried public consequences. As her younger brother, he had guarded parts of her family history, private correspondence, and personal memories precisely because he believed some things should remain beyond palace control. He had lost a sister the world wanted to define. William had lost a mother the world refused to stop discussing. William finally lowered the page. "Why did you wait this long?" he asked. His voice stayed calm, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable. Spencer did not avoid the question. He told his nephew that Diana's words carried too much force to be given to him before he was ready. If the letter had arrived when William was younger, grief might have turned guidance into rebellion. She had not written it to push him away from monarchy. She had written it to stop monarchy from pulling him away from himself. That distinction cut deeper than William expected. Diana's message warned that one day protecting the crown and protecting his own family might no longer feel like the same choice. She urged him never to confuse emotional distance with strength. Duty could demand discipline, she wrote in substance. but it should never make him unreachable to the people who loved him most. William folded the first page carefully and walked several steps away. Spencer stayed where he was. He did not follow. Silence filled the space between them, until the prince finally turned his head and asked his uncle to remain until he had read every page. Spencer agreed, but then added something William had not expected. Diana had written the letter because of one specific incident. One moment had convinced her that her eldest son might someday inherit the same emotional trap she believed had damaged her marriage. William looked back at him, and suddenly, the letter was no longer only about what Diana feared for the future. It was about the night she first saw that future beginning. Every private warning begins somewhere. Diana's did not begin with a public scandal, a television interview, or a newspaper headline. It began after a conversation involving her eldest son, one that left her convinced William was already learning to bury emotion beneath responsibility. To everyone else, the incident passed almost unnoticed. To Diana, it was terrifying, because she believed she had just witnessed the first sign that the system shaping her life was beginning to shape her child as well. William had reached the age when people no longer spoke about his future as something distant. The expectations were becoming real. He was being reminded that one day he would carry responsibilities unlike those of almost any other child around him. Diana noticed what those conversations did to him. Her son became more careful, more controlled, and increasingly determined not to create problems for anyone else. She admired his sensitivity, but she feared it was becoming something heavier. Diana finally understood the danger. After a private family dinner at Althorpe, the Spencer family estate, where much of her childhood history remained rooted. That evening, she overheard young William quietly say that he should stop upsetting people with his feelings because, one day, everyone will depend on me. He did not say it dramatically. That was what frightened her most. The words sounded settled, almost practiced. Diana carried that sentence with her for the rest of the night. She found Charles Spencer later and told her brother exactly what she had heard. Spencer initially tried to reassure her. William was thoughtful, he said. Serious children often tried to protect the adults around them. But Diana pushed back immediately. Her son was not simply becoming thoughtful. He was beginning to confuse strength with silence, and she knew how dangerous that confusion could become inside royal life. Diana's fear was brutally simple. She was not afraid William would fail as a future king. She was afraid he might succeed by giving away too much of himself. The future king, meaning the person expected eventually to inherit the throne, would be trained to remain composed under extraordinary pressure. But she believed no title should teach her son that love, fear, grief, or vulnerability were weaknesses to be hidden. Spencer stopped reassuring her when he realized she was asking for something more serious. Diana made him promise that if she were ever unable to speak to William herself, he would protect a message for her until adulthood gave those words their proper meaning. Her brother agreed. Within days, Diana began writing. She revised the pages later, sharpening one message above everything else. William must never mistake emotional isolation for leadership. Spencer remembered the final handover clearly. Diana placed the sealed pages into his hands, closed his fingers around them, and refused to let him read a single line. She told him only to recognize the day when William needed his mother more than he needed another royal advisor. Now, decades later, William stared at his uncle across the same unanswered silence. "Why now?" he asked. And Spencer knew the answer would drag Diana's old fear directly into William's present life. William had finished the letter, but he was no longer reading the words of a woman frozen in memory. Diana's warning felt disturbingly current. That changed the conversation instantly. The prince looked across at Charles Spencer and demanded the one explanation his uncle could no longer postpone. Why now? Why after all these years? Why bring Diana's voice back into his life at the precise moment when every decision he made carried consequences for his father, his wife, his children, and the crown? Spencer had expected anger. He had watched William take on more responsibility while becoming more careful about what he admitted, even in private. The pressure was no longer only ceremonial. It touched his marriage, his children, his relationship with Charles, and the expectations attached to the monarchy itself. The institution, meaning the royal system of duties, advisors, traditions, and public obligations surrounding the family, could turn even a private disagreement into something larger. Spencer believed his nephew had begun carrying that burden by saying less and enduring more. William leaned forward. "Do you think I failed them?" he asked. Catherine's name did not need repeating. Neither did the children's. The question came out sharper than anything he had said before. Spencer refused to retreat. He told his nephew that Diana had never written the letter as an accusation. She had written it as protection. Her fear was not that William would stop loving his family. Her fear was that responsibility would make him so controlled that the people closest to him would no longer know when he was hurting. William pushed back immediately. Spencer did not live inside royal duty, he said. His uncle did not have to measure every family disagreement against headlines, constitutional expectations, or the possibility that one emotional reaction could become public controversy. William had learned that silence sometimes prevented damage. Spencer answered that silence could also create it. Then Charles Spencer finally gave him the reason he had chosen this moment. During a recent private conversation between uncle and nephew, William had been discussing growing family pressure when he said something Spencer had not been able to forget. "My feelings are irrelevant. The institution comes first." The words hit differently now. Spencer told William they had echoed something Diana feared years earlier. She had heard her young son beginning to believe that other people's needs mattered more than his own feelings. Back then, she had seen the first signs of a child preparing himself to disappear behind duty. Decades later, her brother had heard the adult version of the same idea. William rose so quickly that the chair moved behind him. Spencer stayed seated. The prince crossed the room, reached the door, and wrapped one hand around the handle. For several seconds, he looked ready to leave. He did not. William turned back. "Tell me exactly what she said." Spencer repeated Diana's instruction. "Give the letter to her son when duty begins teaching him that silence is the price of strength." William released the handle. At that moment, he understood the letter was not asking him to remember his mother. It was asking him to choose what kind of husband, father, and future king he intended to become, and that choice was about to reach far beyond this room. The most shocking part of Diana's letter was what it did not ask William to do. She never told him to abandon the monarchy. She never encouraged revenge against the institution that had caused her so much pain. Her message was harder than rebellion. She asked him to remain inside the system without surrendering the emotional instincts that made him human. That meant William could no longer blame royal tradition for every silence. At some point, the future king himself had to decide what kind of man duty would create. William understood that the monarchy could shape his schedule, his public responsibilities, and the expectations placed upon him. But it could not decide everything. He still controlled how he spoke to Catherine, how closely he listened to his children, and whether disagreements inside his own household became walls instead of conversations. Those choices belonged to him. Diana's message made that painfully clear. Leadership, in her view, was not the ability to feel nothing under pressure. It was the ability to remain connected while carrying it. Spencer stepped away for a short time, leaving his nephew alone with the pages. William returned to one passage again and again. Diana had written about children remembering emotional absence more deeply than public ceremony. The sentence unsettled him because George, Charlotte, and Louis were growing up inside a world he understood too well. He wanted to protect them from royal turmoil. Yet suddenly he wondered whether protection could become another kind of distance if he hid every difficult feeling behind composure. Catherine entered his thoughts next. William had always believed that keeping certain pressures to himself spared her unnecessary strain. Now the letter forced him to question that instinct. Had there been moments when his silence left his wife carrying uncertainty alone? Had he confused shielding her with shutting her out? Diana's warning made the danger brutally personal. She feared that the expectations surrounding his title might someday force his spouse to compete with the institution for emotional loyalty. Spencer returned and immediately sensed that something had shifted. William was calmer, but the calm was different now. It was no longer defensive. The prince told his uncle that whatever happened next, Catherine would hear about the letter directly from him. No aide would brief her. No palace intermediary would soften it. No official paper would translate something that belonged to his family. William folded Diana's pages carefully and placed them back inside the envelope. Then he pressed both palms against the table and looked at Spencer. "Then I start at home." His uncle gave a slow nod. That decision sounded private, simple even. But privacy inside the royal household rarely remained untouched for long. And once others learned that Diana's final message had changed something in William, the letter would stop affecting only the man who had opened it. Secrets inside royal families rarely remain isolated, because even private choices change public behavior. William did not circulate Diana's letter. He did not permit copies. Yet the people closest to him quickly sensed that something had shifted. His tone changed. Meetings ended differently. Conversations he might once have postponed suddenly became urgent. And when Charles learned that Spencer had finally delivered Diana's message to his eldest son, the king understood immediately that the past had entered the room again. William kept his promise to Catherine first. He spoke to her privately and explained that Diana had left a message about marriage, children, duty, and the danger of becoming emotionally distant under pressure. Catherine listened without interrupting. The warning mattered because royal life did not affect William alone. Every demand placed on him could reach directly into their home. She understood that his choices shaped not only his public role, but the emotional safety of George, Charlotte, and Louis as well. Catherine did not begin by asking what the letter meant for the monarchy. She asked William whether reading it had hurt. The question broke through his control almost immediately. He admitted that it had. He told her the pain came from hearing his mother's voice, in words written for a future she would never see. Catherine became emotional, not because of royal consequences, but because Diana had been thinking years ahead for the son she feared might one day carry too much alone. Charles heard about the letter soon afterward. An aide informed him that Spencer had delivered a personal message from Diana directly to William, but no one provided the contents. The uncertainty unsettled him. He remained seated after the aide left, saying nothing. Weariness replaced anger. Diana's voice had returned through their son, and for once the king had no control over what she had chosen to say. Charles eventually asked William one question. He did not demand the pages. He did not ask for a summary. He asked whether the letter would change how his son behaved. William answered carefully. Diana's words, he said, would influence how he protected his household when royal expectations threatened to overwhelm private family needs. His home could not become an extension of every palace demand. Some decisions involving Catherine and the children would remain theirs. Charles picked up a pen and slowly turned it between his fingers. William remained standing rather than taking the chair offered to him. The king finally set the pen down without writing anything. He did not object. William began creating firmer boundaries almost immediately. Family time became harder to interrupt. Private disagreements stayed private. Catherine was brought into difficult conversations sooner, rather than protected through silence. Yet Charles gave no clear sign that he accepted the deeper reason behind those changes. William left the conversation unsure whether his father had understood him or simply delayed the argument. That uncertainty could not last. Soon, William would stop speaking as an heir and confront Charles as something far more vulnerable, a son still carrying the unfinished pain of both his parents. For years, almost every serious conversation between Charles and William carried something invisible into the room with them. History, hierarchy, expectation, and the knowledge that one day the son would inherit the father's position. Diana's letter made that distance impossible to maintain. William no longer wanted a constitutional conversation. He wanted an honest one. So when father and son finally sat together without aides, folders, secretaries, or schedules between them, the most important question was not what Diana had written. It was whether they could speak about why. William had asked for the meeting himself. No private secretaries, no senior advisors, no one standing nearby to soften difficult words before they were spoken. A private secretary is a senior royal aide who manages official duties, correspondence, and access. But William wanted none of that machinery between them. He also refused to hand over Diana's letter. The message belonged to him, and he intended to protect that boundary even from his father. Charles listened as his son explained what the pages had forced him to confront. William told him that growing up between two wounded parents had taught him to become the calm person in every room. When tension rose, he absorbed it. When people around him struggled, he tried to steady them. The habit had followed him into adulthood. Everyone saw composure. Few people asked what that composure cost. William did not soften the next part. He told Charles there had been moments when he needed comfort, but felt responsible instead. Moments when being the sensible one became easier than admitting he was frightened, angry, or hurt. The king remained quiet. Then he acknowledged something painful. He had sometimes mistaken his son's control for strength. Because William rarely demanded reassurance, Charles had assumed he did not need it. The confession changed the tone completely. William finally told his father what Diana had feared most. She believed duty might someday teach their son to disappear emotionally inside responsibility. Charles closed his eyes for several seconds. He did not challenge Diana's judgment. He did not ask William to defend her words. Charles answered as a father instead. If Diana's message helped William become more present with Catherine, more open with his children, and more honest with himself, then he should listen to it. Some parts might hurt Charles personally, he admitted, but pain did not automatically make them wrong. William's expression softened. The king reached toward his son, then stopped before touching his arm. William closed the distance himself. For the first time, Diana's letter was no longer dividing father and son. It was allowing them to name old wounds without turning those wounds into weapons. But outside that room, nobody knew what had happened. And when William appeared in public soon afterward, one small change in his behavior was enough to ignite speculation across Britain about the private message his mother had left behind. The palace never published Diana's letter, yet the knowledge that it existed was enough. Within hours of confirmation that Charles Spencer had delivered a final private message to Prince William, the story overwhelmed Britain. Broadcasters cleared schedules. Newspaper editors rebuilt their front pages. Crowds appeared at places permanently linked to Diana's memory. But beneath the frenzy was something more powerful than curiosity. Millions understood that somewhere behind palace walls, a son had finally heard his mother speak to the man he had become. William refused to let the moment become public property. Through his office, he made clear that Diana's exact words would remain private. His office, meaning the small team responsible for managing his official communications and public duties, would confirm only that the letter existed and that it had been delivered personally by Spencer. That boundary immediately became part of the story. Some commentators argued that a message from such an important historical figure belonged eventually to the nation. Others defended William's right to keep one final conversation with his mother away from public consumption. Charles Spencer faced pressure of his own. Some questioned why he had waited so many years. Others praised him for protecting Diana's instruction instead of using the letter for attention. Spencer answered through a brief documented statement released to the press. He refused to quote a single sentence. He offered only one summary. His sister wanted William to protect his humanity as fiercely as he protected his duty. That line spread quickly because it transformed the mystery surrounding the letter into something deeply personal. The public response became impossible to ignore. Outside Kensington Palace, Diana's former London home, people gathered with flowers and handwritten notes. Kensington Palace is a royal residence closely associated with her life after marriage, making it one of the places where public memory of her remained strongest. One national newspaper appeared that morning with William's photograph beneath a stark headline, "A Mother's Last Message." The words captured exactly what many people felt. This was no longer merely a royal story. It was a story about grief surviving time. William faced that emotion directly at his next public engagement. Someone called out a question about Diana. The prince paused before answering. He thanked people for their kindness, then said only that some words belong permanently within a family. It was not a revelation. It was a boundary. Then one woman in the crowd spoke to him as he passed. "Your mother would be proud of you." William stopped for the smallest moment. He swallowed, nodded once, and continued without trying to answer. The public would never know every word Diana had written, but by then, the consequence of those words was already visible. The final question was no longer what the letter contained. It was what William would choose to become because of it. And that answer would emerge only after the headlines finally went quiet. In the end, Princess Diana's final letter did not overthrow anything. It exposed no secret plot. It demanded no revenge. Its power was far more personal. A mother who knew she might not always be beside her son had tried to reach across time and remind him that leadership without love becomes emptiness, while duty without emotional courage becomes another kind of prison. Charles Spencer had guarded that message for years. William finally received it when he was ready to understand why she had written it. William made one decision immediately. Diana's exact words would remain private for the rest of his lifetime. The letter would not become royal property, political ammunition, or another document dissected by strangers. It belonged to a son. That distinction mattered, because so much of his mother's life had already been consumed publicly. This time, the prince would protect something the world could not claim. Spencer understood what that decision meant. His responsibility was finally over. He had not preserved Diana's message to influence William or control the direction of his future. He had kept it because his sister wanted her voice to reach her son at the moment he needed it most. Before they parted, William thanked his uncle not for delivering history, but for returning a private part of his mother that had never truly belonged to anyone else. Charles felt the consequences too. The conversation created by the letter had made father and son more honest with one another than they had been in years. The king accepted that Diana would always remain part of William's emotional life. He no longer treated that presence as something competing with their relationship. Instead, both men understood that acknowledging the past gave them a better chance of preventing its pain from repeating itself. William carried that lesson home. With Catherine and the children, he became more deliberate about protecting time, speaking sooner, and refusing to let pressure turn silence into habit. George, Charlotte, and Louis would still grow up around responsibility, but their father would not teach them that strength meant hiding every difficult feeling. Catherine would not be left guessing when he was struggling. That became the real action behind Diana's warning. William returned to the letter one final time when everything had gone quiet. He unfolded the pages, read the closing words slowly, and placed them back inside the envelope. Then he kept them beside a private family photograph, rather than among official royal papers. That choice said everything. Diana's final message was never truly about secrets inside the monarchy. It was about identity. The crown could tell William what responsibilities he carried, but only he could decide what kind of husband, father, son, and future king would carry them. Spencer's promise had been fulfilled. Charles had faced the past. Catherine and the children had become part of the future Diana hoped her son would protect. And that was the lasting force of her final letter. It did not ask William to choose between his mother and the monarchy. It reminded him that the strongest crown he could inherit would mean nothing if, somewhere along the way, he lost the man she had raised him to become. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.